Many people say that the indie film business is broken. I say something can't be broken unless it was actually working to begin with. The indie film business has actually never been working properly. In today's episode, I'm going to explain why. If you want to be a successful indie filmmaker, you need to know a lot about not just the production of movies, but the business. We are going to tell you the truth and reality of what really happens in the indie film business. So notice that I said in the intro, I called it the indie film business. I didn't say indie film making. There is a big difference between indie film making and the indie film business. And that is the disconnect in this industry in indie filmmaking. See, most indie filmmakers are basically artists, and they're not really interested in the business side of the film business. They always say to me, oh, somebody else will take care of that. You know, you want to produce a film, I don't run numbers, I don't do spreadsheets, I don't do this. I'm an artist, I do creative stuff. I'm the filmmaker, I make the art. And I say, that's wonderful, except there's a reason we call it the indie film business, because there's the film part, which is the artistic side of it, but then there's the business part, which is all the other stuff that has to happen in order for the art to happen. In other words, there has to be money, there has to be sales, distribution. There's lots of components that have to happen for a business to be functional, to run properly, and to be sustainable. So people say the indie film business is broken. And I say, no, that's not true. The indie film business has never actually been working for the reason that I just explained, that indie filmmakers don't like to do the business part. So let me just take a minute and compare it to this big budget Hollywood filmmaking. Let's call it the studio business. All right, so studios and streamers, the big companies. For the most part, these are public companies, and public companies have a responsibility to report to shareholders and earn a profit, hopefully. All right, that is the point of the business. Those are businesses. They started off, sure, people were making films, but ultimately, the reason they still exist and the reason that they're so big is because they're designed to generate a profit for their shareholders, what we call return on investment. So people are willing to invest in these businesses because they hope to get their money back and an additional profit return on investment. So the mentality of the entire structure of these organizations is motivated on profit, all right, is to run a successful business. Now, the business they happen to be running manufactures a product. The product happens to be entertainment. Feature films, television shows, other forms, sportscasts, news, all this kind of stuff when you're a big vertically integrated company. Their business is to provide good quality entertainment to audiences. But notice I say their businesses, all right? So only one component of that business actually does the entertainment, like creates the entertainment. It's a very important component, because if you create crappy entertainment, nobody's going to want to consume your product. Like, audiences don't want to watch bad movies and TV shows. They want to watch good quality stuff. So it's very important that that side of the business, the creation side, makes good quality product. That's the filmmaking side. But that can't exist on its own in a vacuum. On the flip side of that, you have to have the business components, which basically monetize the good filmmaking. Basically, what that means is we need to have a distribution and marketing system on the other side so that when these good pieces of entertainment get made, they are put in front of audiences who can consume them, i.e. watch them, enjoy them, and hopefully pay for them. That is where the revenue comes from and hopefully the profit. So if it was just about making the product and not getting it out to the audiences, these businesses would fail miserably. Why? Because audiences wouldn't know about the products. So basically, as you know, I talk a lot about distribution and marketing. That is the distribution and marketing side of the business. It's basically putting the good quality product that you create in front of audiences, enticing them to be excited to want to watch the product, and hopefully paying for the product when they consume it, i.e. watch it. That's the business side. Without that business side, the film side could not possibly exist. I mean, it's just, that's the disconnect basically in the indie film business. See, in the studio side, there would never be a production department without a distribution and marketing department. And by the way, the distribution and marketing department, because it generates sales and revenue, makes it much easier for the front end, which is the finance department, to raise the money from shareholders and or private investors or whoever they get the money from and the revenue that they earn in order to fund the creation of the product. So the distribution of marketing is the core element that generates sort of the excitement, the story, the narrative, and the money to do the financing. And the financing is what supports the creation of the product. You take this piece of the pie out of the equation and the whole thing comes tumbling down. There's no business. I haven't yet seen in my life a business that doesn't involve sales. Everybody, whether it's a service or a product or whatever, everybody is selling something because sales is what generates revenue and revenue is what drives business. All right. So everybody's selling something. Like you're a surgeon, you're selling surgery services. You're a lawyer, you're selling lawyer services. All right. You're a product company, you're Amazon, you're selling delivery of goods and products. Everybody's selling something. The film business is no different. We're selling entertainment to audiences. So our customer base in the film industry is called an audience. Sometimes they call them consumers in other, industries or customers, whatever. We call it audience. Those are the people who watch our product, which is consuming the product, and ultimately, hopefully, pay in one form or another, all right, and generate the revenue. So this whole thing is driven by distribution and marketing. Every business is driven by distribution and marketing. Sometimes I talk about, a simple sort of business like a coffee shop. You want to run a coffee shop, you could be Starbucks and be a huge national chain and have thousands of locations and be a public company and everything like that. Or you could be a one-off individual boutique single coffee shop. So in order to be successful in either business model, a couple things have to happen. Number one, you need to make good coffee. All right. If you don't make good coffee, then ultimately your customers are not going to want to consume your product because nobody wants to drink bad coffee. All right. So it's got to be at least decent. All right. Number two, you have to make people aware that you make good coffee. So that's a combination of basically, it's marketing more so. So I was going to say a combination of things like a good location. So it's accessible to your audiences. So in the film business, we would maybe call that distribution, all right? Putting it in front of the people. So being in the right location, say on the right street corner, or the right drive-through or whatever it is that allows people to actually come and access your coffee. Because if you're in some valley where it's uncomfortable to go there, it's too far, it's far off the beaten track, no matter how good your coffee is, there's an inconvenience factor and they're not going to come. All right, so that's sort of the distribution side. Make your product available and accessible to the customer. All right, so in a coffee shop, get a good location. And then the marketing side is let them know that you're there. Like put a nice sign up on your coffee shop. All right, Starbucks, you're never going to see a Starbucks that doesn't have nice signage. All right, make the place look presentable. Hopefully do some advertising or local publicity or promotion if you're a one-off. Most of your customers on a one-off boutique coffee shop are going to come from, say, the local area. I'm going to say within a 3 to 4 mile radius. That's what I would assume. I'm not in the coffee business, but I would assume that most of your local customers are going to be locals, or 90% of them, and then you're going to get 10% drive-by and that type of thing. So let those people know that you exist. Let them know that you opened your shop. Send flyers, do social media campaigns locally, target that audience based on area code. You can do that on social media. Then people at least say, oh, there's a new coffee shop. Oh yeah, I saw that on the corner. It's very accessible. Just down the street, I can walk there or I can pull in and they have a drive-through, whatever the case may be. Let's try it. And then people try it. And by the way, they make great coffee. And then people tell other people. So that's the formula for success. All right. But having the great coffee just doesn't cut it. That's not good enough. All right, you have to have the great location and you have to have the right marketing campaign. You got to make people aware. That is the foundational elements of a successful business, any business. So why should that be any different in indie filmmaking, in the indie film business? It actually isn't. All right. The problem is that filmmakers do not treat filmmaking as a business, indie filmmakers. All right, studio people do. In Hollywood, there's a whole executive department. I mean, the entire executive division of a studio, I'm not sure any of them have ever made a film. Like, I'm not sure they ever went to film school. I'm not sure they even know what filmmaking is. Perhaps some of them have never been on a set. But it doesn't matter because that's not, they assign those tasks to the good filmmakers, the talented filmmakers. What they need to know how business works. They need to know how finances work, how revenue is generated, how to manage a public company, how to manage infrastructure. Their job is to manage and oversee a business operation. Their job is not to make the movies. Yes, do the company make the movies? Yes, of course it makes great movies, but they're not the filmmakers. They're the managers of the business, all right? And their job is to hire good people in each of the elements of the business, filmmaking, finance, distribution, marketing, to oversee it all. I would never expect a studio maker or studio executive to be a filmmaker. It almost is a disconnect. It's almost like what you went to film school and you learned how to do, balance sheets and finance and public offerings and stuff like that. No, you probably went to law school or business school or something like that. That's what I would expect. The same thing in the distribution division. Filmmakers don't go to film school to learn how to do distribution. People go to business school to learn how to do distribution, to learn how to do marketing. So in the distribution and marketing department, there's likely a lot of people who would like to be a filmmaker, but they're trained in distribution and marketing. They're trained in business. All of them are savvy on spreadsheets and social media and marketing and all this stuff that a lot of filmmakers don't know how to do. So they're very, very focused on the business elements of the film, all right, as the finance people are. They're focused on just understanding how equity structures work and deal structures and debt and all this kind of stuff in order to get the money or to structure the money in order to enable the filmmakers to make the films. So these people, the filmmakers, obviously they're trained in making good films. That's their job. Now let's look at the indie film business because that's a studio, right? A studio's big thing, has lots of divisions, lots of people, lots of infrastructure. Let's compare that to the indie film business. And here is the disconnect. Here is why I said at the beginning of the show that the indie film business has actually never actually been working properly. So when people say it's broken, I say, no. It's actually not broken. It just never started working properly. It was never functional to start with. Here's why I say that, by the way. Not to give away my age, but I started in the film business in 1986. As we sit here in this podcast, it's 2025. All right, so that's 39 years. I started when we were still selling VHS tapes. I mean, not still. That was like it for the first 4 or 5 years of my career. Then DVD, and then, I've lived through a lot of the film business, and I've seen a lot of filmmakers come and go, and I've kind of observed. I'm talking from my observation, all right, of 39 years in the business. And then I can sort of project backwards and say, hey, it felt like it was sort of the same throughout that. So let me explain the reality of the indie film business, all right? Notice how I call it the indie film business. As I said, I don't call it film making. Film making, as I explained earlier in a studio, is just one component of the business. The disconnect is that indie filmmakers are generally not business people. Not only are they not business people, but they're totally turned off by the business components of making movies, all right? They're totally turned off by the concept of financing. They're totally turned off by distribution and marketing. That's the disconnect, all right? The disconnect is that they think that they can be sustainable as in the making of the films without the other components actually happening around them. And they say, well, but I'm not a big company. I don't have a marketing department. I don't have a distribution division. I say, no, I get that. I understand that. But do you understand that without these functions happening, you can't possibly have any chance of success? Because no matter how good you make your product, if it doesn't get out there to an audience, then nobody's going to know about it and nobody's ever going to see it. So there's a huge disconnect between focusing on making the product and not understanding how it actually gets sold and how revenue gets generated. So the reason that I call it this disconnect is because filmmakers are artists, especially indie filmmakers. Well, all filmmakers, even in the studios, okay? They're artists. Their focus is always, and always should be, on making great product. That's the point. I said the first thing you got to do is you got to make great coffee. You got to make great entertainment. If you don't make great entertainment, when they watch it, they're not going to talk highly of it, and nobody's going to want to watch your product. So you got to be a good artist. It definitely starts with being a good artist, but it doesn't end with that. All right. So filmmakers only focus on the art. They say, my job is to be a good artist. And I say, I agree with you. You don't necessarily have to be good with spreadsheets, good with finance, good with distribution, good with marketing. You don't necessarily have to be that person. But what you do have to do, and here's the disconnect, is you have to appreciate and understand that those functions must happen properly. And therefore, you have to affiliate yourself with people who do that stuff well. In essence, you have to kind of be part of a team. This is what I say to my students, all right? I teach in 2 film schools, and I say this to my students. I say, you're in the film department in a big university, and you're going to focus on making good product. But, right across campus, there's a business school. And those people are going to focus on understanding how to do marketing, distribution, finance. Those people are learning all those skills. So wouldn't it make sense for you to walk across campus, introduce yourself to a couple of marketing and finance majors and say, hey guys, do you want to maybe cooperate, be a bit of a team? Because I'm making this great product, but I need someone to help me sell the product. I need someone to help me market the product. I need someone to help me finance the product. So your skill sets complement my skill sets, and together we can run a business, a successful business. And that's more or less what a studio is, right? I mean, it just happens to be that on a bigger scale. The disconnect is that indie filmmakers, and this is why I say the indie film business has never really been run properly, because indie filmmakers generally don't do that. All right. They just focus on making the film. And then they say, oh, that distribution, we'll figure that out later. Or we'll worry about it. Somebody else will figure it out. Somebody else will worry about that. Nobody else does worry about it. Most films don't even get properly distributed. Or if they do, filmmakers get totally screwed in bad distribution deals because they didn't figure it out. If you want to be successful as an indie filmmaker in the indie film business, you got to treat it as a business. All right, you have to recognize that the distribution and marketing components and the finance components are just as important as the artistic components. Basically, have a team, an infrastructure. You don't have to be a big corporation. Like I said, walk across campus and say to a marketing person, when I make this great movie, can you help me get it out in front of audiences? Because here's the difference between the marketing major and the film major in a university. The film major only wants to focus on making the product. The marketing major only wants to focus on figuring out how to get something out to the market. These are complementary skills. They don't want to do what the other person does. The film person, they're not even interested in marketing. They have no desire to do marketing, all right? Even if they did have the desire to do it, they don't have the skill set because they focused on filmmaking, not on marketing. This person has the skill set because they actually focused on it. Then there's one other component that is the disconnect, is the resources to put it all together to make it happen, which I'll talk about in a second. But you don't want somebody who has no skills doing something that they don't know how to do. So that's why you have to get together and work as a team. You have to cooperate. And for indie filmmakers out there who are listening to this, don't think that you can beat the system. Don't think that you can change how business actually works. And I'm not just talking the film business. I'm talking every business. As I said before, name any business on the planet that doesn't deal with these 3 components: finance, product, and distribution marketing. I mean, it's the way that business operates. So why do you think as a filmmaker that you are smarter or better or more capable or can somehow get around that system when nobody on the planet can? That's the reason there's a disconnect, is because you're thinking that it's only about product. It's not. You need to have a team. You need to have cooperation. Everybody says filmmaking is a collaborative venture. And I say it's super collaborative, but most people forget the collaboration part. They think collaboration is, a cinematographer working with actors, working with directors, on set. Yeah, of course there's a ton of collaboration there, but they don't even understand that the real collaboration happens on the distribution and marketing side or the finance side. That's the true collaboration. That's the team. That's what you need. And let me tell you something else, indie filmmakers. You cannot possibly do this alone. It's overwhelming. It's way, way too much to do. A single human being just doesn't have the time, the capacity, and generally the skill set to do it all. There's too much to do. That's why big studios and big companies have all these divisions. That's why you put a team together. You can't be an expert in every trade. As they say, jack of all trades, the expert of nothing. You want to be really good at what you do, and then you want to affiliate with people who are really good at what they do. You want skill sets to complement each other. So even though you can understand, and I say to my students all the time, understand what goes on here. Okay, understand film tax credits, understand distribution contracts, understand marketing techniques, okay? You're not necessarily going to do them. You're not going to execute them, but just understand and appreciate sort of the narrative of what needs to get done. Just sort of, like I said, talked about the executives. Just understand the overview. Because as a filmmaker, you basically are a business person. You are an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur, you're creating a product and you're trying to get it out to market. The disconnect in the film business is you're just creating the product. You have not really thought too much about how to get it out to market. So one of the other disconnects is the filmmaker who creates the product says, I'll get a distributor and they'll get it out to market. So if there's anything that's broken in the system, that's broken, because distributors aren't really getting the job done these days anymore. Just the way distribution works, the streaming, all this kind of stuff. There's vertical integration. A lot of indie filmmakers get locked out. It's just hard to penetrate the system and get to the audiences. So I'm working on a lot of innovative ways to kind of bypass sort of that broken, restrictive way of getting to audiences. Because at the end of the day, it's just about how do I put it in front of an audience that's going to enjoy and appreciate my product and hopefully pay for it. I keep saying hopefully because, it's getting harder and harder to get people to extract their money to pay for quality. But I still believe that people will pay for quality products. When people say the film business is broken, I say it's just never been working because nobody has ever taken it seriously as a business. Filmmakers generally do not treat it as a business. They treat it as art. Now, I got lucky in my life, all right? I'll tell you how I got lucky. When I was graduating high school, I think I said this story in another episode, but my dad said to me, so what do you think you want to do in your life? And I said, without hesitation, I want to be a filmmaker. And he said, when you say you want to be a filmmaker, do you want to be and I didn't say I want to be in the film business. I said I want to be a filmmaker, all right? So I was focusing on making as well, all right? I wasn't focusing on the business because I was graduating high school. I didn't even know what business was. So he said, do you want to be a producer? Do you want to be a director? And I said, I don't know. What's the difference? He said, well, a producer deals with all the business components, money, contracts, legals, organization, all that kind of stuff. And a director deals with the artistic stuff, which is basically making the film. So if you want to be a producer, you should either get a business degree or a law degree. If you want to be a director, you should probably go to film school, get a film degree, learn all the artistic components. So I said, oh, that sounds pretty cool. I think I want to be the producer. So what I went in an undergrad, I got a degree in finance, and then I went to law school and got a law degree. But 100% with the intention of going in being a filmmaker. So now I'm going to be a producer. I'm going to be a film producer. I have business, I have law. I've got the components that I need to be a successful producer. But I still wanted to make the films, right? Now, after I graduated, I spent 26 years in distribution, which was a really good thing because I learned how the business works. Then I started making films. But the truth is, because of that one conversation, and because I trusted my dad, and even though I didn't even understand it made no sense to me that I was going to go and get a law degree in order to make movies. It makes total sense to me now. But back then, it didn't make that much sense, because I would have thought you need a film degree to make movies. But as a producer, my dad understood, he was an entrepreneur, and he understood how business works. He understood that all these business components have to happen, just like in any business, in order for the artistic components to happen. So he gave me really, really good advice, which I took, and it worked out really well for me. So I'm giving you that same advice right now. I'm saying, well, I'm not necessarily saying to you, filmmakers, go to business school and law school. All right. I'm saying appreciate and understand that the business components have to happen. If they don't happen, you're basically handcuffed in being a successful filmmaker in the film business. All right. You can always make a film. You can be what I call a one and done. You make one film, you make it good. You and your family enjoy it and your friends. It never gets proper distribution unless you're super lucky and you stumble across something, and then it's over because you didn't generate your money back. If you want to be a sustainable, successful career filmmaker who does this as a living, who makes film after film after film, generates nice revenue, generates hopefully a good profit so that you can live a good, comfortable life. live in a nice house, drive a nice car, have a family, go on vacations, like live a good, comfortable life and still enjoy what you're doing, filmmaking, then you have to understand that this is a business, because it's the business that creates that revenue. All right. If you want to turn a blind eye, as most filmmakers do, and say, I'm just the filmmaker, I make the product and somebody else does it, as an entrepreneur, an independent filmmaker, it's just not going to happen. People aren't going to come knocking on your door and say, hey, can I raise money for your film? Can I distribute your film? You're going to need to affiliate yourself with people who actually have that skill set, who know what they're doing. And if you don't do that, it's going to be a very rough road. Let me just reiterate. I want to make this very clear. I'm not saying to you, the filmmakers, that you need to be experts in spreadsheets and finance and distribution. I'm not saying that. Be experts in making films. All right. What I'm saying to you is affiliate yourself with people who are those experts. All right. Collaborate with those people. Find people whose skill sets complement your skill sets, and then together you can run a sustainable business. That is the disconnect. That is why people say the indie film business is broken. And I say, no, it's not broken, because filmmakers have never treated it like a business. The disconnect is treat it like a business. You treat it like a business, like any other business, you'll give yourself a very much higher chance of success. And ultimately, you will make more films, have a much better lifestyle, and be exactly what you set out to be, which is a career filmmaker. Good luck. So as always, I welcome lots of questions from the listeners. You can reach me directly at my email address, jdeverett@deverettmedia.com. Please send me your questions and your concerns and I will address them. And from wherever you're listening, please push subscribe.